the deleted evidence, the communication platforms that were never subpoenaed, the search history that directly contradicted the narrative Nichol Kessinger maintained across 6 interviews, the January 2018 searches for Shanann Watts that the district attorney's own office confirmed as real and never explained. That was the framework. What comes next requires your complete and undivided attention, because what we are about to walk through comes directly from the forensic phone data, and no official explanation for any of it has ever been provided. The version of events that has been widely repeated goes something like this.
Hi. It's me. I miss your face. I was just calling to say hi. Call me back. Bye. Hi. It's me. I guess just call me back when you have a chance. Bye.
So how you met him, where you met him, how long you guys were dating, and those kind of things initially.
Okay. I think I met him sometime in June, probably early June. It might have been May. It was just talking at work. It was pretty casual. And he didn't have a wedding ring on his finger. And every time I talked to him, he didn't tell me that he was in a relationship. He didn't even mention his kids right away either. And then one day he told me that he had 2 kids. I was like, that's pretty cool. And started telling me about his kids.
That sounded like a sarcastic comment.
No, I thought it was kind of cute. I was like, oh, he's a dad. It was like right around Father's Day too. So whenever that is in June.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm not good with holidays.
He told me he had kids, and then it was Father's Day shortly after that. So that's what I do now. And I was like, I thought it was cute. And then he's telling me about him. He's pretty excited about him. And then he mentioned that he did have a significant other. And then he told me that those 2 were in the process of a separation.
Did he mention the children's name or his significant other's name?
I didn't know his significant other's name for a while. And then I think he told me his kids' names pretty quick, but to be honest with you, on an exact date of when that happened, I don't know. And I just feel like some of this happened so long ago that I can't tell you like the exact words of the exact conversation at the exact time and place, because it's like we had a lot of conversations. I mean, we talked every single day, so it's like I'm trying to help you guys with the stuff, like the stuff that's more current. I can give you guys a lot more like detail and exact times, but when you're asking me about something that happened 6 weeks ago and exactly what was said, it's like, I mean, I'm sure I can give you a general idea, but to be honest with you, like to pinpoint exact words, it's not gonna happen.
Did you ever give him like books or articles or anything to read about saving your marriage? Did you ever provide anything to him like that?
About saving his marriage?
Yeah, like how to recover a marriage or how to save your marriage. You know, there's all sorts of publications and books out there.
No, but I did tell him, and I don't know if I did this through text or phone. That will be something you guys will, I'm sure, figure out. But I told him a few times, like, I think that you should take the time to read some articles about what separation does to kids.
We want to show that you were never near him that day, period.
Oh, I mean, you guys can track my stuff.
No, yeah, I mean, that was something we will have to get a warrant for anyways. I'm just saying, if we asked for it, would you have objections to that?
No, you can have it.
So,
I'm a pretty boring person.
Well,
I don't
it sounds
go
like
too
you
many
just went
places.
to work that day and then you came home and you're there at 3:45.
Yeah, like give or take like 5 minutes. But yeah, so 3:45. I meet Jim there. Yeah, I would totally.
And so Jim is understand from an investigative point, he could be a person who could say, yeah, I was there at 3:45. He doesn't know Chris. He doesn't know anything. He could say with one phone call, yeah, she came in at 3:45. Done.
Totally.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I don't have to ask anything more than, hi, Chris, my name's Kevin. Or Jim. And I'm not saying you have to give it to you.
Just leave Jim alone. Jim does not need to be wrapped up in this.
If at some point I needed Jim's info to, let's say we couldn't find your phone records, would you tell me
can
who
have
Jim
them.
was?
I will give them to you.
Would you tell me who Jim was if I couldn't?
If you had to. Okay. I don't really want to involve him in this. That is not fair to him. That's not, no, if I do not have to do that.
That's fine.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I am having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast.
I am so out of breath.
Nichol Kessinger, upon hearing the news that Chris Watts' family was missing, bravely and voluntarily contacted law enforcement herself. She came forward, she cooperated, she answered every question. She gave investigators everything they needed. She had nothing to hide. And that willingness to engage with the investigation repeatedly and without hesitation is the reason she walked away without charges. That narrative has been treated as settled fact by a significant portion of the media coverage surrounding this case. It has been repeated in documentaries, in articles, and in public discussion for years. The problem is that when you actually read the documented sequence of events, the timeline does not support that narrative, not even close. Here is what the records show, in precise chronological order, because the order is everything. On August 15th, 2018, at 5 o'clock in the morning, CBI agent Tammy Lee received a phone call from a man named Tony Husky, the security manager at Anadarko Petroleum. Husky informed Agent Lee that a contracted employee had been exchanging what he described as suggestive emails with the primary suspect in the Watts family disappearance. He provided two names, Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger. That phone call happened at 5 in the morning on August 15th. Approximately 4 hours and 50 minutes later, at 9:50 in the morning, Nichol Kessinger contacted investigators. Sit with that sequence for a moment and let it register fully. The company she worked for had already given her name to law enforcement before she ever picked up that phone. Law enforcement already knew who she was. Law enforcement was already moving toward her. The story that she bravely stepped forward on her own, that she volunteered herself out of a clear conscience and a desire to help. That story collapses the moment you understand that Anadarko had already made that call hours before she did. She was not getting ahead of the investigation out of goodness. She was getting ahead of something she could feel closing in on her. And what she did in the hours between the Anadarko tip and her call to investigators makes that conclusion extremely difficult to dismiss. On that same day, August 15th, the same day she supposedly reached out to cooperate with law enforcement, Nichol Kessinger was on Google running searches. She searched the phrase, "Can cops trace text messages?" She searched, "How long do phone companies keep text messages?" She searched, "What is the difference between text message content and text message detail?" And then, after running those searches, she deleted every single one of them. Let that land. While positioning herself as a cooperative and forthcoming witness, she was simultaneously researching the limits of law enforcement's ability to retrieve digital communication records, and then erasing the evidence that she had done so. This is not interpretation. This is documented in the forensic analysis conducted in connection with this investigation. The deleted searches were recovered through digital forensics and are part of the discovery record that was publicly released. These are not allegations. These are documented facts. Now, before we go further, I planted a thread earlier in this video about a background check, and we are going to return to that thread in full detail. But first, you need to understand what Nichol Kessinger was doing before law enforcement ever sat down across from her for the first time. Because the 48 hours between the murders and her first interview contain some of the most consequential documented behavior in this entire case. August 14th, 2018. Shannon Watts had been missing for less than 24 hours. Her daughters were missing. An entire community and an increasingly alarmed national media were beginning to follow the story. Law enforcement was working an urgent missing persons investigation that would soon reveal itself to be something far more devastating. And on that day, Nichol Kessinger wiped her phone. Not selectively, not carefully curated. She performed a comprehensive deletion of her digital footprint connected to Chris Watts. She deleted all of her text messages. She deleted all of her photographs. She deleted her contact entries. She deleted her emails. Everything on that device that connected her to Chris Watts was gone. She then reportedly told Chris to delete everything off his phone as well. And a close friend of hers, named Charlotte, who had received a photograph of Chris from Nichol, along with conversations about him, deleted her entire conversation history with Nichol too. Let us be precise about what this represents under the law. Deleting material evidence during an active homicide investigation is not simply poor judgment. It carries specific criminal designations: obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence. Both are serious crimes. Both can carry significant legal consequences, and both were committed here in a documented and verifiable sequence. When investigators eventually confronted Nichol Kessinger about the deleted records during her second interview, conducted by Agent Kobach, her explanation was that she had been grossed out by Chris Watts. She was disgusted by him. She simply did not want his name appearing on her phone any longer. That was the offered justification for a wholesale deletion of digital evidence during an active investigation into the disappearance of a pregnant woman and 2 children. And rather than pressing her on that answer, rather than pointing out that what she described had a legal name that had nothing to do with being grossed out, the agent across the table guided her toward a response that would not sound incriminating. The conversation moved forward. The moment passed. But the deletions did not stop at text messages and photographs. Nichol Kessinger also attempted to destroy her SIM card before surrendering her device to investigators. And when the Northern Colorado Regional Forensic Laboratory finally examined what remained of her data, Detective Michael Prill's own forensic report, issued on October 30th, 2018, confirmed explicitly that the laboratory did not possess the technology required to perform complete physical data extractions from Apple devices. The recovered data, Prill documented, was not inclusive of everything stored across the applications on her device. The hundreds, and potentially thousands, of deleted messages were never recovered. That is not a footnote in this investigation. That is one of its defining features. An investigative lab confirming it could not fully access the device of a person who had already demonstrated she was researching law enforcement's data retrieval capabilities and actively destroying records. And the investigation moved forward anyway, treating what could be recovered as sufficient. Across all 6 of her interactions with law enforcement, Nichol Kessinger was asked repeatedly by different investigators in different sessions whether she and Chris Watts communicated through any platform beyond standard text messages and phone calls. Her answer was consistent every single time. It was all just texts. Everything is in the text records. And the phone call logs, unwavering, clear, never changing, until her second interview with Agent Kobach, when it changed. In the middle of an answer, she casually mentioned Skype. She dropped the name into a sentence and kept talking, as though she had said nothing significant. Agent Kobach did not stop her. There was no follow-up question. No clarification was sought. The conversation simply continued, as if the word had never been spoken. Here is why that single slip carries enormous weight. Skype is not only a video calling application. Skype allows users to exchange text messages through its internal platform. Those messages exist entirely outside of a standard iMessage or SMS thread. Accessing them would require a completely separate legal records request directed at a completely different company. Those Skype records were never requested. The subpoena was never filed. The platform was mentioned once. The investigator did not respond to it, and the communication history that may have existed there was never examined. Then there is what Detective Prill documented independently in his forensic report. He wrote that he was confident Chris Watts was communicating with Nichol Kessinger through channels that went beyond what appeared in his standard phone records. He noted specifically that Chris was receiving images from her, and that those images were being stored inside a disguised application on his phone, one designed to look like a standard calculator, but functioning as a concealed digital vault. The purpose of that application was to ensure that Shannon Watts would never encounter those images during a casual look through her husband's phone. The images were arriving through a channel that required separate investigative access. That investigation never happened, and sitting in the discovery file, clearly documented, was confirmation that Chris Watts was actively using Snapchat in the weeks leading up to August 13th. Snapchat is a platform built around ephemerality. Messages and images sent through it are designed to disappear automatically. Those records were never subpoenaed. So here is the documented digital picture that the investigation left behind when it concluded. A forensic laboratory that confirmed it could not fully extract data from Nichol Kessinger's Apple device. A second communication platform, Skype, accidentally revealed by Kessinger herself during an interview and never investigated. A covert photo storage system, documented in Prill's own forensic report and never fully examined. And Snapchat, confirmed present in the discovery record and never subpoenaed. The Weld County District Attorney's Office reviewed all of that documented evidence and called the investigation complete. The narrative Nichol Kessinger, built for law enforcement across those 6 interviews, rested on a single essential foundation. She believed Chris Watts was essentially already divorced. She thought the separation between Chris and Shanann was already effectively finalized. She had no real understanding of how serious their relationship had become. In fact, she claimed she was actively encouraging Chris to go back to Shanann, to try to repair his marriage for the sake of his children. She was, in her own telling, the voice of reason trying to push him back toward his family. That was the story, consistent across every interview, repeated and never wavering. Now, let us look at what her phone was actually documenting during the course of this relationship. On July 24th, 2018, weeks into the time she and Chris had been spending together, Nichol Kessinger searched a specific phrase on Google. The phrase was, "Man I am having an affair with says he will leave his wife." Not man I am dating who is separated. Not man going through a divorce who told me it was almost finalized. Affair, that is her word. That is her search. That is her phone. You do not reach for that particular phrase. If you genuinely believe you are seeing a man who is mutually and openly separating from his spouse. On August 4th, 2018, Chris Watts was in North Carolina with Shanann and their daughters on a trip that Nichol Kessinger herself later claimed she had encouraged because she wanted him to try to work on his marriage. While he was on that trip, while he was supposedly doing the thing she pushed him to do, Nichol Kessinger spent 2 full hours searching wedding dresses online. On August 8th, 2018, Chris was still in North Carolina. Nichol Kessinger searched the phrase, "marrying your mistress." Mistress, once again, her word, her search, her phone. The word mistress does not belong in the vocabulary of someone who believes she is involved with a separated man on the verge of a finalized divorce. It belongs in the vocabulary of someone who knows exactly what the nature of their involvement is. And then there is the data point that the Weld County District Attorney's own office confirmed was real and then never explained. Forensic analysis of Nichol Kessinger's phone showed she was searching Shanann Watts by name as early as January of 2018. Not August, not June, January. Nichol Kessinger claims she did not begin any kind of relationship with Chris Watts until June of 2018. She claims she did not know Shanann existed as a named person in Chris's life until well into their involvement. But her phone was pulling up Shanann Watts' name 5 months before she says the relationship began. When reporters pressed District Attorney Michael Rourke specifically on this data point, he confirmed it was real. It came directly from the forensic extraction of her device. It was not a reporting error. It was not a misattributed search. It was on her phone. And he stated clearly that the investigation never reached the point of independently verifying what those searches meant or why they existed at that date, because Chris Watts entered a guilty plea, and the plea brought the investigative process to a close. The anomaly was confirmed as real. It was never explained. It was never pursued. It sits in the discovery record exactly where it has always been, without resolution. During her first interview with investigators, Nichol Kessinger described meeting Chris Watts at work, saying it started casually, that he was not wearing a wedding ring, that he did not immediately mention being in a relationship, and that when he eventually did, he told her the two of them were already in the process of a separation. She described learning about his children and finding it endearing. She described their relationship as something that developed organically from ordinary workplace conversation. When asked about specific dates, specific words, specific conversations from early in the relationship, her answers became noticeably vague. She explained that so much time had passed that she could not pinpoint exact details. She offered that she could give a general idea, but that to pinpoint the exact words from conversations that happened weeks earlier was beyond what she could reliably provide. And yet, when investigators moved to more recent events, her recall sharpened considerably. The vagueness that blanketed the early period of the relationship did not extend to the timeline of August 13th itself, to her whereabouts that day, to her arrival at home and the approximate time she got there. She also mentioned a person referred to in the interviews as Jim, someone connected to her alibi for the day of the murders. When investigators suggested that a simple confirmation from Jim could help establish her location that day, she became protective. She stated clearly that she did not want Jim involved. She did not want him wrapped up in something that was not fair to him. She expressed this reluctance, even in the context of an investigation into the disappearance of a pregnant woman and her 2 daughters. The protective instinct extended further toward her own privacy interests than toward the urgency of the investigation itself. The investigators did not push. The conversation moved on. Another moment passed without the kind of follow-through that the situation seemed to demand. Here is what the documented record of this investigation ultimately tells us when you assemble every verified piece side by side. A woman who was researching law enforcement's capacity to trace text messages on the same day she was presenting herself as a cooperative witness. A woman who deleted comprehensive digital evidence during an active homicide investigation. A woman who instructed others to delete their records too. A woman who attempted to destroy her SIM card. A woman whose device was housed at a lab that confirmed it could not perform complete extractions. A woman who maintained across 6 interviews that all communication happened through standard texts, then accidentally mentioned an entirely separate platform that was never investigated. A woman whose phone documented search history using the words affair and mistress. At the same time, she was claiming she believed herself to be involved with a man who was separated. A woman whose device contains a search for the full name of the victim 5 months before she claims to have known that victim existed. Every one of those points is sourced. Every one of those points is documented. Every one of those points was available to the investigators who sat across from her during those 6 interviews, and every one of those points remained unresolved when the investigation was declared complete. The Weld County District Attorney confirmed the January 2018 searches were real, and that they were never independently explained. Detective Prill's forensic report confirmed the limitations of the lab's extraction capability. The discovery record confirms the existence of Snapchat and confirms it was never subpoenaed. The interview transcripts confirm that Skype was mentioned once and never followed up on. These are not interpretations. These are the documented contents of a publicly released investigative file. What this case deserves, what Shannon Watts deserves, what Bella and Celeste and unborn Nico deserve, is not a rehashing of the known facts about a guilty man who has already been sentenced. What they deserve is an honest accounting of every thread that was available to investigators and was not fully pulled, because 4 people lost their lives on August 13th, 2018, and the full truth of everything surrounding that night has never been completely told. That changes today. We have covered the foundation, the timeline of Kessinger's supposed cooperation, and what the records actually show, the documented deletion of evidence, the communication platforms that existed beyond what was recovered, the search history that directly contradicts the narrative she maintained across every interview, and the January 2018 searches that the district attorney's own office confirmed as real and never explained. But none of that is the most significant part of what we are going to examine. Remember the background check, the report that came back before investigators ever sat down across from Nichol Kessinger for the first time. The report that law enforcement received, acknowledged, and then apparently moved past without further action. The report whose contents have never been fully and publicly addressed. And when you hear what that background check contained, and when you understand how it connects to the behavioral patterns we have laid out here today, the picture of this investigation, and what it may have missed, becomes significantly more troubling than anything we have covered so far. This is True Crime Dre, and this is the story that the headlines never finished telling. If this investigation into the documented evidence matters to you, if you believe that every thread deserves to be pulled and every question deserves a real answer, then hit that like button right now and subscribe to True Crime Dre so that it goes live. This channel exists for the people who want the full truth, not just the comfortable version of it. We are going to move through this methodically. Every point is documented. Every claim is sourced. And by the time we reach the end, you will understand why the questions surrounding this investigation have never gone away, and why they refuse to. Nichol Kessinger lived approximately 25 minutes away from the Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado. That distance is not incidental. It becomes one of the most important geographic facts in this entire case when you place it next to a specific piece of forensic phone data recovered during the investigation. At 6:16 in the morning on August 13th, 2018, the morning Shanann Watts and her daughters were murdered, Nichol Kessinger's phone pinged a cell tower in Frederick, Colorado, not near her apartment, not near her workplace, in Frederick, near the Watts family home. The night before, while she and Chris were FaceTiming, her phone had pinged near her own residence, exactly where you would expect it to be based on where she lived. But on the morning of August 13th, the documented tower data placed her device 25 minutes from home, in the town where the murders occurred, and then her phone went silent. From 6:16 in the morning until 2:26 in the afternoon, Nichol Kessinger made 0 phone calls, 8 consecutive hours of complete silence. That gap would be notable for anyone. For Nichol Kessinger specifically, it is extraordinary. Forensic review of her phone records across a 90-day window confirmed that she made at least 1 call every single hour of every single day throughout that period. Not occasionally, not most days, every hour, every day, consistently and without exception. Until August 13th, 2018, there was not a single comparable gap anywhere in her documented call history. The one morning that gap existed was the morning a pregnant woman and her 2 daughters were killed. She did not clock into work that day until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She had no verified alibi for that morning. And here is the detail that eliminates any straightforward argument for coincidence. Across an entire month of phone records reviewed after August 13th, her device never once pinged that Frederick Tower again. Not a single time. Because after that day, she had no reason to be anywhere near that house. Anadarko Petroleum operated nearly 400 security cameras across their facility, including cameras positioned to cover the employee parking lot. Footage that could have confirmed exactly when Nichol Kessinger arrived at work on the morning of August 13th existed and was fully accessible to investigators. No timestamp from that security footage was ever publicly produced verifying her arrival time on that day. Her time card, which she herself referenced during her first interview with investigators, was never publicly verified by law enforcement either. She mentioned her clock-out time during that interview. She never mentioned when she clocked in, and nobody asked. Now give this next section your complete focus, because this single documented detail, more than almost anything else in the entire discovery file, is the one that law enforcement never properly confronted. Survey 319 is the Anadarko oil field site, where Chris Watts drove on the morning of August 13th. It is the location where he buried Shanann in a shallow grave. It is where he submerged Bella and Celeste's bodies in crude oil tanks on the property. It is, in the most precise terms available, the crime scene. In Nichol Kessinger's very first interview with investigators, she told them that Chris going out to the oil field that morning was completely routine. She said it happened regularly with the operations team. She said it raised no concern for her whatsoever. That was her first account. 6 days later, after investigators received and reviewed her phone records, that account changed entirely. Suddenly, she remembered a detailed conversation she had with Chris the night before the murders, on Sunday evening, in which she had questioned him specifically about why he needed to go to Survey 319 first thing Monday morning. She told investigators she had said to him, and this is documented in the discovery record, that going to check a release was not his job, that he was not part of the environmental team, that there was no obvious reason for him to be at that specific location. And then she disclosed something that should have stopped the interview completely. She told investigators that on Monday evening, hours after Chris had disposed of his family at that site, she had sent him a text message asking him to send her a photograph, proving he had been there. She requested photographic proof of his presence at Survey 319, the same Survey 319. On the same day, his family was buried there. Now place that request inside the full context of their documented relationship. Across months of daily communication, texts, calls, and exchanges documented extensively in the phone records. There is not a single other instance of Nichol Kessinger asking Chris Watts to prove his location on any workday. Not one. But on the specific morning, he visited the site where he had concealed the bodies of his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. On that morning alone, she asked for a picture, documented proof that he was physically present at that location. When this information emerged during the interview, Agent Kobach did not follow up. He did not ask why that request was made only on that specific day. He did not ask why that site specifically, and not any of the 3 other locations Chris visited that same morning. He moved the conversation forward. A key witness in a quadruple homicide investigation told investigators she had requested photographic evidence of the primary suspect's presence at what would later be confirmed as the crime scene, and the investigator said nothing. Around 2 in the morning on August 14th, in the early hours after Shannon was reported missing, something appears in the documented phone records that investigators noted but never fully resolved in a way that has been publicly presented with clarity. Chris Watts and the lead detective were attempting to connect by phone. Every time the detective called, the line produced dead air. Chris called back, dead air again. This cycle repeated for nearly 10 minutes. A broken and unconnected line, cycling back and forth with nothing going through. Then, in the middle of this pattern, Chris took a break from those attempts. He called Nichol Kessinger on his personal phone. That call lasted under 1 minute. Then he called the detective back, this time using his work phone. And at that exact moment, 2:07 in the morning, Nichol Kessinger called Chris's personal phone. That call lasted 11 minutes, the exact same 11 minutes that Chris was on the phone with the lead detective on his work phone. Both calls running at the same time. Same duration, perfectly overlapping. Investigators who reviewed these records advanced the theory that the repeated dead air represented Chris attempting to add Nichol Kessinger onto the line as a silent third-party listener. When the 3-way connection kept failing, he adapted. He called the detective from his work phone and had Nichol call his personal phone simultaneously so she could listen in on what the detective knew and what he did not. That was the final documented call between Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger. It happened while he was being questioned about the disappearance of his entire family. The next area requires careful handling, because it deserves precision, and because the commitment this channel makes to you demands transparency about exactly what is confirmed and what is not. Chris Watts disclosed to investigators that he had attempted to subdue Shannon using Oxycodone on the night of August 12th. He had never been prescribed Oxycodone. When investigators asked him where he obtained it, he told them that was a secret he intended to take to his grave. He has never answered that question. To this day, the source of that oxycodone is officially unresolved. Researchers who have conducted detailed analysis of the call logs associated with this case have identified a specific sequence in Nichol Kessinger's phone records. A call to Chris, followed by a call to a clinic, followed by a call back to Chris. The reported content of that clinic call, as discussed in serious research analysis of the call log evidence, involves questions about oxycodone dosage and what quantity could induce a miscarriage. I'm going to be direct with you about where that information sits in terms of sourcing. This sequence has been documented within detailed research analysis of the call log evidence connected to this case. I am presenting it because it exists in the documented research record and because it connects to something that is fully confirmed which I will address in a moment. However, the specific content of that clinic call has not been independently confirmed through a publicly released discovery document that I can point to by page number. I will always tell you when something occupies that level of sourcing, because that transparency is precisely what separates this channel from noise. Here is what is fully confirmed. And on the record, Nichol Kessinger told investigators clearly, across her interviews, that she had absolutely no knowledge of Shannan's pregnancy. She stated she did not find out until the case was being covered by national news. She said that had she known about the pregnancy, she would never have been involved with Chris in the first place. And Chris Watts has refused, permanently and completely, to identify where he obtained the oxycodone he used against his pregnant wife. Whether those two confirmed facts connect to Nichol Kessinger in any documented way is a question this investigation never formally pursued, and nobody in an official capacity has ever been required to answer it publicly. Now we reach the background check. Law enforcement confirmed they ran Nichol Kessinger's background on August 15th, 2018, the same day she first made contact with investigators. They had her documented history from the very first day. Here is what the publicly available records show. On December 9th, 2006, Nichol Kessinger was 19 years old. She was arrested for underage possession and consumption of alcohol. This was documented as a second offense. The case was dismissed. In an adjacent county, under the same date of birth, and the same middle name, identifying the same individual, a separate record shows charges for driving without a license and an additional alcohol-related offense. Again, a second charge in that county at the same age. That case was also dismissed. No probation, no jail time, no documented consequences of any kind from either jurisdiction. 2 counties, multiple charges, all dismissed. Then there are the allegations that public court records cannot confirm, because they allegedly occurred when she was a minor and juvenile records are sealed by law. A source with stated first-hand knowledge described a violent incident involving Nichol Kessinger at 16 years old, involving a knife. That allegedly led to an arrest and a deferred felony conviction contingent on her remaining out of legal trouble. A detailed public account referencing Aurora, Colorado, and approximately 2004 or 2005, described the alleged incident as one that permanently divided 2 families who had previously been close. I am presenting those as unverified allegations, not as established fact. That line matters, and this channel will not cross it. But here is what is established fact. Law enforcement had a background in hand on the very first day showing a documented pattern of arrests and dismissed charges. A person positioned at the center of a quadruple homicide investigation who had already deleted material evidence. Before her first interview sat down, should have been approached with every measure of investigative scrutiny that situation demanded. Instead, she was designated a protected witness before a single statement she made was independently verified. And for the sake of proportion, consider this comparison drawn from the same investigation. A peripheral acquaintance of Chris Watts, named David Cologne, wrote a letter to Chris in jail. In that letter, he made a passing comment describing Shannan as overbearing. Law enforcement contacted him immediately. They called him in. They pressed him on the inconsistency between what he had written and what he had said earlier. One passing comment from a minor witness with no documented role in the crime was investigated in the same week it surfaced. Dozens of verifiable and documented inconsistencies from the woman whose affair directly preceded 4 murders were never once formally challenged. On October 30th, 2018, Detective Michael Prill submitted his forensic data report to the Weld County District Attorney's Office. It stood apart from everything else in the discovery file. For the first time, someone inside the investigative system was writing in a way that made clear they were no longer fully accepting the narrative Nichol Kessinger had been constructing since August 15th. Prill documented her Google search history in specific and precise detail. He flagged her deletion of critical evidence. He wrote about the disguised calculator application and the images being transmitted through it from outside the standard text thread. He stated with documented certainty that Chris Watts had been communicating with Kessinger through channels that had not been examined. He described her voicemails and her overall effect on multiple occasions throughout his report, using one specific word: creepy. His word in the official record. This was a man inside the system who had looked at the complete picture and was raising his hand. Standard legal procedure required that discovery materials, including Prill's report, travel from the district attorney's office to the court, then to defense counsel, and then to Chris Watts at Weld County Jail. That process typically spans several days. By approximately November 2nd, 2018, Chris Watts very likely had that report in his hands. On November 6th, 2018, exactly 1 week after Detective Prill's report was submitted, Chris Watts accepted a plea deal. No trial, no witness testimony, no Nichol Kessinger sitting in a witness chair being cross-examined by a defense attorney who had read every single word of that discovery file. The investigation ended. Whether Chris Watts accepted that plea purely to avoid a death penalty sentence, or whether he understood that a trial would force certain questions into a courtroom that he needed to keep out of a courtroom, is something only he can answer. But 1 week between that report and that plea is not a coincidence that can be dismissed without explanation. Here is the complete documented record of what was never properly resolved, assembled in one place so that its full weight can be understood. Nichol Kessinger demonstrably provided inconsistent statements to law enforcement across 6 separate interviews regarding her whereabouts, her search activity, the applications she used to communicate, the timing of her evidence deletion, and what she knew about Shannon's pregnancy. The Northern Colorado Regional Forensic Laboratory confirmed in writing that it could not perform a complete physical data extraction from her Apple device. Skype records were never requested after she accidentally confirmed she had used the platform. Snapchat records were never subpoenaed, despite Chris Watts' confirmed usage being documented in the discovery file. Full GPS location data was never properly extracted from her device. Investigators relied on estimated cell tower data that carries a significant margin of error. Her clock-in time on the morning of the murders was never publicly verified through security footage that existed at Anadarko and was fully accessible. Her phone pinged the Frederick Tower at 6:16 in the morning on the day of the murders, and that data point was never officially explained. She requested photographic proof of Chris Watts' presence at Survey 319, the crime scene, on the day those murders occurred, and that request was never followed up on in any documented capacity. She searched Shannon Watts by name 5 months before she claims to have known Shannon existed, a fact confirmed as real data by the district attorney's own office and never independently investigated because Chris Watts pleaded guilty. The source of the Oxycodone Chris Watts used against his pregnant wife was never identified and remains officially unresolved. Those are not theories. Those are documented gaps in an official investigation, confirmed by the forensic reports, the discovery record, and in critical cases by the district attorney's own public statements. Every single one of them remains open. This investigation did not begin with a conclusion and work backward. It began with the documents, with the forensic reports, with the recorded interviews, with the phone data and the search history and the call logs, and it followed those materials to wherever they led. What they led to was not a tidy resolution. What they led to was a list of questions that should have been asked and answered in 2018 by people with the authority, the resources, and the legal obligation to pursue them. Those people had the evidence in their hands. Detective Prill had already documented it clearly enough that his own language inside the official record reflected genuine concern. The digital fingerprints were there. The inconsistencies were there. The unsubpoenaed platforms were there. The unexplained tower ping was there. The request for a photograph at the crime scene was there. The January searches were there. All of it was there. And the investigation was called complete. Shannon Watts was 34 years old. She was a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a woman who documented her love for her family openly and without reservation. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3. Nico never took a single breath outside of his mother's body. 4 lives ended on a single morning in Frederick, Colorado. And they deserved the fullest possible accounting of everything that surrounded that night, not a partial one, not one closed prematurely by a guilty plea that conveniently eliminated the need for a witness to take the stand, not one where confirmed anomalies were acknowledged by the district attorney himself and then left permanently unexplained. Justice is not supposed to be a partial thing. You do not close a file and declare it complete when the file has confirmed pages missing. You do not designate a witness as protected before independently verifying a single word of what she told you. And you do not dismiss the questions of people who have read the same documents, listened to the same recordings, and arrived at the same uncomfortable conclusions by calling it something dismissive and walking away from the accountability it requires. Shanann deserved better. Bella deserved better. Celeste deserved better. And Nico, who never had the chance to draw a single breath in the world that was supposed to be waiting for him, deserved better than an investigation that stopped asking questions because a guilty plea made asking them inconvenient. The only thing anyone outside of that system can do is keep asking, document the gaps, name the inconsistencies, hold the record up to the light, and refuse to look away from what it shows. That is what this channel does. That is what this community does together. If this video gave you something to think about, if these documented questions landed the way they should, then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not for numbers, but because these questions deserve to reach more people than they currently have. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you stand. Tell us which details stopped you in your tracks. And if you are not already subscribed to True Crime Dre, do that right now. Because this story is not finished. The questions documented here are not going away, and neither are we.